So the Los Angeles Clippers, they have a pretty great squad. Looking at their overall roster, they still have a pretty solid roster even after losing some pieces. I mean, they lost Isaiah Hartenstein, I think. They obviously lost Kawhi Leonard and PG-13 to injuries last season, but coming into next season, they have a bunch of new pieces in John Wall. They got Robert Covington, Norman Powell. They got all these new guys signed up. They still got Terrence Mann, Zubac. I think they're going to be a pretty great team next season, depending on if injuries happen. And if they don't, obviously, because Kawhi Leonard and PG-13 and John Wall all have had their pretty, recent history of injuries, I think they should be pretty fine. So today we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Clippers, talking about why they're going to surprise a lot of people next season and what they're going to be doing. So what's up? My name is JDC. If you like the video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate it. And let's get into the video. So looking at the overall roster, we got Nick Batum. We still got Brandon Boston here, Robert Covington, Paul George, Rodney Hood, Reggie Jackson, Luke Kennard, who I still think has a lot of potential. Luke Kennard, Kawhi Leonard, Terrence Mann. We got Marcus Morris, Norman Powell, and we got Zubac and obviously John Wall. So very interesting lineup right here. So the projected starting five for me would probably have to be John Wall at the 1. At the 2, most likely going to be Norman Powell. 3, Kawhi Leonard or Paul George, whoever won. Probably Paul George at the 3, Kawhi Leonard 4, and then probably Zubac 5. That's probably my starting 5 right there. Off the bench, it's probably going to be Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, Robert Covington, Nicholas Batum. There's a lot of guys on this roster. I think the biggest thing that they're missing is a backup center. I think they really do need to go out and get a backup center. I mean, kind of like Hassan Whiteside. Great role player, someone that can give you some boards, some points, and blocks. So that's what they really need off the bench. And looking outside of that, I mean, Luke Kennard, obviously, probably their best three-point shooter. And moving forward, they probably should keep him. They got him on a $13 million deal, so it depends. I think Luke Kennard, he's definitely here to stay, only 26 years old. Definitely one of their brightest spots on the team. So we'll talk about the big three, if you want to call them a big three. I mean, John Wall, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. I mean, John Wall hasn't played in, one season from now? Because he played in the 2020-2021. Yeah, I mean, looking at his stats since last season, I mean, he was a 20 points per game scorer. The problem with him in that season was that obviously, it was pretty inefficient, first of all. Second of all, his turnover ratio was pretty horrible for a team like the Houston Rockets. Obviously, being pretty bad, having a high turnover ratio isn't something you want to see from, your veteran. So, over the season, he averaged 21 points per game, 3 rebounds, and around 7 assists. He is 6'3", 210 pounds, so pretty bulky right there at the point guard position. Looking at his shooting splits, 40% from the field and 32% from 3. Pretty mediocre stats for someone that should have been playing at a pretty high level. Obviously, coming off an injury, I think he still did pretty well. I would have expected a little bit more out of John Wall, if I'm being real. He did also throw in a steal game, so that's also great to see. But his turnover ratio, 3.5 turnovers per game, pretty horrible. So I think John Wall, he definitely changes the dynamic for the Clippers, obviously, because they finally get a true point guard, first of all. Reggie Jackson, he was great and all, obviously, but John Wall, he gives you that playmaking, that defense, that perimeter defense, and he knows how to play the point guard position. He's a pass-first point guard, someone that's not going to score first. He can play and make. He can actually dunk, still pretty okay. His athleticism is also up there still. He's what they needed, and great pickup from the Clippers. I think he signed like a 2-year, $13 million deal, which is a steal of a contract, first of all. And I think he's going to thrive here with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. So looking at Paul George, stats from last season, I think he went down with an injury. I don't know when it was, but I think it was before the start of the second half, I want to say, because I don't think he played in the All-Star game. So looking at Paul George's stats from last season, 24 points per game, 7 rebounds, and around 6 assists. Man, Paul George, he was playing like an MVP at the start of the season. I mean, he was one of the better players in the league. I think at one point he was averaging around like 28 points per game. Looking at his shooting splits, 42% from the field, 35% from 3, and around 86% from the free throw line. So also threw in 2 steals a game. Obviously, when we talk about Paul George, his defense is his biggest asset, but also being around, 6'9", and having a bag, his handle package, probably one of the better ones I've seen from a small forward in a while. I mean, Paul George, he's definitely shifty with the ball. He can handle it pretty well too. he's one of the better players in the league, and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, once they come back, the defense is going to be great. Obviously, Paul George being one of the better two-way players and adding alongside Kawhi Leonard, who, in my opinion, is the best two-way player in the league. The Clippers, I project them to be, I want to say, around the 4th or 3rd seed in the West next season, depending on how injuries happen and if they do decide to, kind of sit out Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, or John Wall some games. I think they could make the 4th or the 3rd seed. I mean, they're going to be pretty great. No team in the West wants to verse this team in the playoffs. I mean, the defense is going to be pretty crazy. So, looking at Kawhi Leonard, obviously didn't play last season due to, I want to say, an ACL injury or something like that. Looking at his stats from the previous season, averaged around 25 points per game, around 7 rebounds and 5 assists. Looking at his shooting splits, he shot around 51% from the field and around 40% from 3 and 89% from the free throw line. So Kawhi Leonard, he's going to be shooting the lights out of the ball. I mean, one of the best defensive players in the league. His wingspan, absolutely great. 6'7", 225 pounds, only 31 years old too. The problem with him, obviously, is injuries, and that's pretty much a trend for all three of these guys. But I think they should be fine because the Clippers, they're an organization that, they can win. Obviously, being in Los Angeles, being alongside the Lakers, they've been overshadowed, but I think it's this time for the Clippers. I mean, they're going to probably win over the Lakers because the Lakers right now, they're looking like they're in shambles. I mean, LeBron's getting up there in age. Anthony Davis not looking too great. Russell Westbrook not looking too great. So I think the Clippers are going to make a huge run next season. And looking at the role players, I mean, their role players are still very great. I mean, Reggie Jackson playing the role-playing point guard position for this team. Nick Batum being a good two-way player. We got, obviously, Zubac, who's going to be pretty great. Terrence Mann, who definitely has been surprising a lot of people still. Norman Powell and Robert Covington, who both should be some pretty great pieces. I really like the Robert Covington signing because he's a good two-way, obviously, player. That's a trend with this team, good two-way players, but also players that can play some good defense overall. I mean, Robert Covington, he can, he's a pretty streaky shooter, but his defense is really the biggest thing for his game. Same thing with Norman Powell. I mean, he's a good three-point shooter, but his defense is still on par. So overall, the Clippers, they're going to be fine. I mean, Tyronn Lue, obviously having some, controversy in the last few years, but he's still a pretty great coach. I still believe in Tyronn Lue. Obviously, I think the offense is going to be great. With John Wall's playmaking, it just opens up the offense a lot. I mean, the only guy in the starting five that really can't shoot is Zubac and even John Wall, but John Wall shot, a measly 32% from the three, so it's not even too bad in itself. The role players are going to play well off the bench. Like I said, they really do need to go out and get a center off the bench. I think they do. Losing Isaiah Hartenstein to the Knicks was definitely a huge blow to them. I mean, he would have been pretty great for them in the starting lineup. Someone that can do everything at a pretty average level. Nothing too great. I mean, he's a jack of all trades, basically. They really do need to go out and get a Hassan Whiteside type player. So, looking at the stats from last season, the team overall had the 18th best offense and the 11th best defense. Now, it goes without saying that Paul George was injured for a majority of the season, too. They were playing with a lot of role players, so that's pretty interesting in itself that they were the 11th best defense. So adding in Kawhi Leonard and John Wall, that's going to go up even more. And the time frame for this team, it's going to be pretty little. I mean, John Wall, Paul George, and Kawhi, they're all around 30 years old. So I want to say their window is around 2 to 3 years from now, maybe even less, but maybe even 1 year if things don't work out next season. So hopefully they can get it done next season. I think they can. The biggest thing for them is going to be injury history and just overall staying on the court. So hopefully the Clippers can get it done. And that's the video. So my name is JDC. And peace.